Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience and sticking with us. It would not be a virtual conference without some technical difficulties. So thank you very much. We're excited to jump right in. We've lost a little bit of time, so we're gonna just jump right into the materials here. I'm Christina Miller. I'm staff here at the Alliance, and I serve as a Senior Policy Fellow for California State Policy. This is session 8.02, Hotels to Housing, a race against time to add more housing stock. I will say, I think we saved the best for last. This is an amazing panel and an amazing session with really valuable information that is truly meeting the opportunity of this moment as we think about ways to transform hotels and vacant distressed properties into permanent housing for people who are experiencing homelessness or low-income renters. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it right over to our esteemed moderator, Mary Tingerthal. Mary, kick us off.
Thank you very much, Christina. It is my pleasure today to introduce some real success stories in taking existing buildings, mostly hotels and motels, and converting them into permanent housing. And the people you'll hear from have organizations that have created thousands of units of new permanent housing in the last year for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, doing it quickly, and doing it at a cost significantly lower than building new. So here's who you'll hear from. First, we'll have Lourdes Castro Ramirez, who was appointed by California Governor Newsom to serve as Secretary of Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency in 2020. She leads and oversees 10 state departments responsible for expanding affordable housing, developing comprehensive solutions to end homelessness, guarding civil rights protections, regulating banks and financial services, and strengthening consumer protections with licensing of nearly 4 million professionals. Next, you'll hear from Gus Seeling, who serves as the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board since its inception in 1987. Under his leadership, VHCB has invested $370 million in state funding and leveraged $1.7 billion to rehabilitate over 13,000 affordable homes and also conserve farmland and historic community buildings. Finally, you'll hear from a practitioner, Naomi C., who is a developer at the Low Income Housing Institute, a developer and shelter provider operating throughout the Puget Sound region of Washington state. I have to say that when I started working as a consultant to the Alliance last November, they asked me to help them assess whether it made sense in more parts of the country to convert housing or hotels and existing properties to permanent housing. I have to say, when I started, I was a skeptic. I had seen examples where the use of hotels as emergency shelter early in the pandemic did not go well. So I came to them and said, I want to look and see, can you actually do this successfully? Can you do it at a lower cost and at a quicker time to occupancy than building new construction? And I have to say, I've been a bit blown away by the experiences of the people you'll hear from. I didn't know whether hotel owners really would sell. I didn't know if local governments would see this as a positive solution. And I didn't know whether hotels really could be converted to viable long-term properties. Maybe you have some of those same skepticisms, and I hope that in the next hour, we can show you that this is a solution that really takes your you can take into your communities and look at solutions in the future, particularly as we are looking at the possibility of dollars coming into the home program for exactly this purpose. And with that, I'd like to introduce Secretary Castro Ramirez. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Christina, for the invitation. And congratulations to the National Alliance to End Homelessness on a successful virtual conference. I'm very grateful to be with all of you. I'd like to start off by just sharing with everyone that last evening, Governor Newsom shared his State of the State address. He stood at Dodger Stadium with 55,000 empty seats behind him, each seat representing one Californian who we have lost to this pandemic. And as he paid tribute and traced the difficult journey that we all have been on for this past year, he also acknowledged several silver linings. And today I'm thankful to be with all of you to share what California did in the midst of this pandemic to provide and to accelerate permanent housing opportunities for people experiencing homelessness. So with that, we can maybe start the PowerPoint. Just to provide some context for the audience, first, the great state of California is home to almost 40 million people. It is one of the most populous and diverse states in our union. Latinos make up 39%, followed by whites at 37%, and Asian Americans at 15%, and African Americans at 8%. And California is also the fifth largest economy across the world. But we also know that prosperity is not shared by everyone. On any given night in our state, 151,000 people are experiencing homelessness. It's 151,000 people. This represents more than 25%, or about 25% of the entire population of people experiencing homelessness in the United States. So just, for context, California's population represents 13% of the nation's population, and 25% of our homeless population lives in our state. In addition to that, the total number of individuals experiencing homelessness is 85%. Of that 151,000 individuals, 85% are single people or individuals, and 15% are families with children. And among the individuals, 9% are unaccompanied youth, and 8% are veterans. Finally, 30% of the population that is experiencing homelessness is categorized as chronically homeless individuals needing and requiring intensive services and intensive supports, and really a permanent, housing environment. Among California's homeless population, approximately 72% are unsheltered and 28% are sheltered. These are staggering figures, and these figures predate what we now know as a devastating pandemic, a pandemic that has impacted poor communities and communities of color in a disproportionate way. So homelessness in California is at a crisis point. And in fact, in 2020, Governor Newsom dedicated his entire State of the State address to a focus and a commitment to preventing and ending homelessness. He laid out a robust platform of activities, including increasing the production of affordable housing and leveraging state assets. Next. But as we all know, in March of 2020, the pandemic came with a force. California declared a state of emergency on March the 4th, and the state became the first state in the country to implement a stay-at-home order. Within the state's emergency operation, the entire administration, all cabinet members, we all went into full activation mode, and we found ourselves working across departments, working across agencies, and working across disciplines, looking for ways to respond with a sense of urgency and to work together with counties, cities, and communities. Within the emergency operations infrastructure, we developed several task forces and committees. And one of those task forces was the task force that was focused on addressing housing and homelessness. This task force was comprised of individuals from health and housing and emergency response units. And this infrastructure and this focus enabled us to be able to develop and deploy rapid and comprehensive solutions across the state, leveraging federal and state funding and working closely with local communities. We were also able to fill in the gap in many ways that was necessary in terms of providing consistent guidance and technical assistance to homeless providers. We also identified a number of ways to provide greater flexibility with the use of state funding, ensuring that dollars were available for outreach and safety services, and really the needs that were required given the emergency that we were experiencing. Also, very early on in the pandemic, the legislature and the governor authorized up to $1 billion in assistance to help fight the spread of COVID-19. Next. And, as I mentioned, within the overall efforts, the emergency response efforts, we were able to not only respond in a rapid manner, but also develop comprehensive solutions and innovative approaches. And one of those innovative initiatives was the establishment or the creation of Project Roomkey. Project Roomkey is basically the first effort to expand temporary housing opportunities for people experiencing homelessness. This was designed to ensure that we were acting quickly and with a sense of holistic support to ensure that homeless individuals were able to receive safe, isolated housing within motels and hotels. This is a partnership with local government to expand non-congregate settings in securing hotels. The funding for this program came directly from FEMA reimbursement, and we also leverage coronavirus relief funds. The state also put some additional dollars to support the effort. And over the course of the last year, we have been able, in partnership with local communities, to secure 23,000 hotels and motels across the state. And this represents about 35,000 individuals who have been able to be safely housed. The Project Roomkey, next slide, gave a way to the focus of today's conversation, which is the Homekey initiative. We, as I mentioned, knowing that this population, individuals experiencing homelessness, was a top priority for us, and knowing also that at the local level, we were running out of space to be able to provide safe, isolated housing, and also recognizing that there were a number of struggling real estate assets, struggling financially. The idea of Homekey was born in July of 2020. As the governor stated, during that time, he said, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to buy vacant properties and to leverage the federal dollars that were coming into the state and to create permanent housing. And essentially, this became one of the most meaningful expansions to homeless housing in our state. The program was launched in July of 2020. The focus was to target CRF funds to acquire hotels, motels, residential care facilities, and to convert them into permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness or at risk to become homeless. This was a partnership, and it was critical to work closely with cities and counties and housing authorities. And Mary mentioned early on that there was the skepticism of a program like this, and there were a number of stakeholders who were skeptical of our ability to be able to deploy these dollars and to be able to ensure that the success of local communities in acquiring these assets, and to do so in a matter of less than 6 months. And the timing was related to the fact that we needed to expend the CRF dollars by the end of December of 2020. But we moved quickly. We designed the Homekey program, and by the end of the year, we had committed collectively $846 million, leveraging federal relief funds, also leveraging general funds from the state, and also leveraging $46 million in philanthropic funds that were targeted towards providing services and providing support to the various jurisdictions that would be operating a Homekey site. In total, in a matter of 6 months, we produced 6,029 new permanent housing units. Next. Just, some important key highlights that I think were critical to the success of this program. First, we were, from day one and continue to be deeply committed to ensuring that there is geographic equity across the state. And what that means is ensuring that we're doing everything possible to distribute funds across all regions and across all types of communities, our urban, rural, small communities. So the formula within Homekey included a geographic equity table that ensured that funding would be made available to all regions. And as you can see on the map to the right, this is each dot represents the location of the 94 projects that were funded across the state. And we're very proud that 51 jurisdictions out of the 58 counties have a Homekey site. And so felt very much that we achieved our geographic equity commitment. Secondly, we placed a lot of emphasis on targeting and providing direct technical assistance, particularly to communities that did not necessarily have the same capacity as maybe larger cities. Thirdly, we knew the importance of moving these projects to completion quickly, and to be able to do so, we had to clear the path to any land use requirements, and so that was built into the condition of the award, and we received tremendous support from local counties and cities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, philanthropy played a key role. We had a number of philanthropic donors contribute to the Homekey Fund, making funding available to provide services and also to provide targeted technical assistance. So in a matter of 6 months, we were able to produce just over 6,000 units at an average cost of $147,000. Next. Just quickly wanted to share with you all that these projects come in all sizes and in all types, and as I mentioned earlier, they are across the state, small and large communities. The city of Oakland received 3 awards for just under $22 million, a total of 17 housing sites. And one of the things that's unique about Oakland is one of their proposals included a proposal with 15 single-family homes. And it was very exciting that these 15 single-family homes were ready for occupancy in December, right around the Christmas holiday. And the mayor of Oakland, Mayor Schaaf, I'm going to quote from an article that was in the paper, said that as people are moving into these homes, that people heal best when they are able to come inside, when they are able to come into their own home, a place to call their own. So this is the power of Homekey. The second example here is the Yurok Native tribe. They received one award, $2.2 million for 18 permanent units with a priority for Native Americans in Humboldt County. In total, we were able to award 3 Homekey awards to 3 tribes. And then the last example is Riverside County with 2 awards totaling $12 million, which also includes housing for farm workers. And just something of note, Riverside initially submitted 3 applications, and in the process of just doing all the due diligence, one of the projects fell through. And what was important for us is, of course, we had a waiting list, a very long waiting list. We had over $1 billion in requests that came in from jurisdictions. So we were able to move to the next project in line and ensure that those dollars were deployed quickly. And then finally, just to summarize, final slide. Homekey and this effort of working across federal, state, and local government demonstrates that homelessness is solvable, that it requires a bold vision, the vision that was laid out by our governor, Governor Newsom. It requires cross-disciplinary partnerships. That means not just housing folks, but housing and health, and housing and health and transportation in some cases, and labor. A number of people were involved in helping us pull this together. And it also requires, multi-pronged approaches. So you saw that we started with Roomkey as a temporary housing, and then evolved into a permanent housing environment through Homekey. This, historic housing investment also increased regional and statewide coordination, led to improved health outcomes and services, and quite frankly, is laying the groundwork for the long-term efforts that are underway to continue to produce and expand affordable housing for residents of California. So with that, I'd like to now turn it over to my colleague, Gus, for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Ramirez. I'm Gus Seeling, Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. We are a state housing trust fund that also administers the Home Block Grant, the National Housing Trust Fund, and several other programs. Let's go to the next slide. We have depended since we began on developing and investing in a network of nonprofit housing providers that serve every corner of our rural state. You've just heard from our biggest state in the country. Vermont is among our very smallest, with a population of 625,000. From the moment we knew that $1 billion of coronavirus relief funds were coming to the state, developers, all of these are nonprofits, and advocates, told the legislature that there was an immediate need because of the pandemic. Our Agency of Human Services had closed some of our shelters and reduced the occupancy of others to make them more COVID safe. And we're putting people up in motels, much to their credit. Let's move on to the next slide. But it was clear that we needed more housing. We'd been focused on the issue of the potential to convert motels to housing for a number of years. Preceding the pandemic, we'd had a governor who issued an executive order, and that executive order had said that anybody who received any public funds to build affordable housing in Vermont needed to set aside 15% of those units for households experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Our statewide partners were already at about 12% of their portfolios dedicated to households before the pandemic. We're now up over 18%. And as this slide indicates, about a third of the turnovers this past year went to households experiencing homelessness. The example you see here preceded the pandemic, and it was a roadside motel, very worn out, actually done as a 9% tax credit deal, and a great success as permanent supportive housing. The building in the center is a community space, and one of the lessons learned has been the importance of building community as we build these facilities. Let's move on to the next slide. COVID laid bare that the fragility of our emergency system. We more than doubled. We counted 1,200 folks homeless at our point in time count last January. And the number of folks staying in motels more than doubled that number. We were up to about 2,700 as of just a week or so ago, or 3 weeks ago. We had to close overflow facilities. What all of the housing providers in Vermont did, our state agencies, our housing authorities, was to come to the legislature with a comprehensive plan that included money for capital, money for rental assistance, money for mortgage arrearage assistance, as well as assistance to private landlords that would reopen affordable housing. We received $33 million to provide permanent housing. Let's move on to the next slide. Here are a few examples of what we did. Top left, we received a proposal in our largest city to buy storage container units to convert to housing. Our board did not like that idea. It was on a location where the zoning would not have allowed it. The community was opposed. And a few blocks away, this motel was for sale, and we guided the group involved in purchasing it, and it's got 31 rooms with 50 beds. The largest facility is top right. It was a 113-room hotel, now converted to 68 apartments. They were suites, so it involved very little rehab. The folks who were living there are calling it not Susan's Place, but Susan's Palace. Bottom left, what you see is a facility that is actually being used as an isolation facility for folks with COVID, and when we no longer need that, will be converted to permanent housing. And then bottom right is from southern Vermont. It was an old Swiss-style chalet. If you'd been having breakfast in the early 1980s, you might have found Linda Ronstadt sitting at the next table. The owner was 93 years old. We are having much less travel and tourism in Vermont as a result of the pandemic. She was ready to move on and sell. This site comes with 17 acres. So in addition to the 27 rooms created here, there's going to be an opportunity to build out an entire neighborhood. Actually 27 apartments. It needed about $1 million of work. The pandemic provided us the opportunity to say, we need to get this money spent by the end of the year, and therefore we can't leverage the dollars. And so we were pretty much not the only funding source, but the primary, and in some cases, the only funding source for most of these deals. So the speed of needing to get money spent by December 30th was a big part of the decisions around what we did and how we did it. There were deals that did not work. You always need a willing seller. There was one motel in central Vermont that was being occupied by families that the state was putting up. We thought we could make a deal, and ultimately one of 4 partners just said no, and it didn't happen. Let's go on to the next slide. We did a few other things. On the top left is tiny houses. Bottom left was a building in construction, and we ended up with housing for 4 homeless youth and a service provider. In the middle is a modular home. We bought 8 of these modular homes, put them on vacant lots in mobile home parks around the state. And on the far right is an old school that will soon be under construction. This is not a CRF project, but will be 19 more units of permanent supportive housing in a former Catholic school that's been vacant for quite a while. Let's go to the last slide here. And this just shows you that the same issue that the Secretary talked to, the need for spreading the money across the state, assuring regional equity. Most of our communities do not have, our towns do not have any community development staff. Often there's just a town clerk in our smaller towns. And so they really rely upon these nonprofit organizations, not just to provide housing, but as their go-to community development organizations. We also assisted a dozen shelters, making them more COVID safe with bathroom modifications, air exchange systems, adding bathrooms, adding an extra room or two so that there would not be quite the density that they used to have. A few lessons learned as we do this work. One is that you still need to put together the package, not just of capital, but of service dollars and subsidy for the residents. Location is clearly important. Access to, in our rural state, to services, access to public transit is a critical issue for us. We did achieve lower cost and faster response. Usually our tax credit deals, new construction, are well over $300,000 a unit in Vermont. We did most of these projects at under $150,000. You do need to take the time to do capital needs assessments and assure that when you're done, you have a project that you can live with. Zoning is a critical issue. I salute California for waiving zoning requirements. They were a barrier in some communities where the motels were clearly zoned and permitted as facilities that were not for long-term stay. So that is an issue that one needs to pay attention to. And the last thing I'd say, and it goes to is that our best developers talk about the importance of building community and building community into these projects. And so the community space in that early slide I showed you, and that wonderful dining room that you saw, were key attributes in either of those projects, both for the residents themselves and also to engage and bring in the broader community and neighborhood, so that there can be activities and an atmosphere where people are not isolated but a part of a larger community. So those are a few of the lessons learned, and I'm going to stop there and pass the baton on.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Naomi. I knew that it would be hard to follow my fellow panelists, but I'm just in awe of the work they're doing. So thank you all for that. I'm hoping to bring into this conversation a developer perspective, and also as a direct service provider, as well as an outreach worker. So next slide, please. Just quickly. Oh, I think, okay. So are hotels an effective shelter strategy? At this point, we're pretty aware that hotels as shelter reduce COVID cases, they reduce emergency calls, and they also increase exits to permanent housing. Next slide. Just anecdotally, as an outreach worker, I know that my folks will accept a hotel referral, even when they're skeptical of other shelter options. Next slide, please. So the opportunities. We know that hotels are an effective shelter strategy, but do we know they're an effective housing strategy? Cost, time, and ultimately supply have always been our issues in affordable housing provision, and hotels meet all of these things. They're lower cost due to the pandemic, so compared to pre-pandemic valuation. They provide immediate shelter where traditionally permanent supportive housing takes 3 to 5 years. We're at a couple months. As Gus mentioned, per unit cost are significantly lower. And they also introduce an innovative financing mechanism where we're not capped by 9% allocation. Next slide, please. With this recognition, several programs emerged at our local level. So King County had a bond issuance for $400 million for acquisition. The city of Seattle used emergency solutions grant funding to pay for the operations of shelter in hotel. And the governor recently proposed $70 million in capital funds for the acquisition of existing buildings. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take you through just some of our properties and use each to illustrate some of the opportunities and also barriers that were presented as we went through this process. And then I'll summarize some of the lessons learned and recommendations at the end. So keep in mind that we tied up 9 to 10 hotels from the beginning of the pandemic to now. Next slide, please. Okay, Hotel 1. So there's a lot of information here. So what I wanted to do was just have the kind of specifications of the hotel on the left-hand side, pictures on the bottom, and then I'll run through the opportunities and barriers. Like many of the sites we found, this hotel included a large parking lot that could be used to accommodate another 170 units. And the idea was to use emergency solutions grant funding to pay for the operations and as well as the bridge loan for acquisition. There was a lack of coordination between the Human Service Department and the Office of Housing that made federal service funding and acquisition dollars hard to bring together for this hotel. The property also highlighted problems with franchise agreements, which made deadlines for acquisition more pressing because owners had to renew these licenses. And there was also consideration of displacing existing staff who were often low income themselves. Next slide, please. This next hotel, there was strong political support because the local school district had an increasing number of homeless families. And so the idea was to put these families temporarily in the hotel and convert it to permanent housing. However, land use regulation, as Gus mentioned, was extremely prohibitive. NIMBYism drove a lot of this process and some of the barriers we faced. And there was also this risk of displacing low-income individuals who were already in the hotel. And so finding a way to do outreach to those individuals while also moving new populations in. And finally, just logistically, the city's funding timeline didn't always match up with our purchase and sale agreement. So we were facing these really strict deadlines while the city was figuring out their funding sources. Next slide, please. So this was a great hotel, immaculate condition, a strong political support, but this is an example of a hotel that wasn't located near amenities, as hotels often are located near highways or for short-term populations. They're not always near job centers. And so that became a barrier for accessing this hotel, as well as city-county coordination. Next slide, please. So there's some themes about barriers here. NIMBYism, political, service provider capacity, as well as site-specific and development. Next slide, please. With that said, I just wanted to go through the role that each of these different entities play in addressing this. And everyone has a role in making this possible. So increasing coordination, just to do some highlights, is essential to coordinate across jurisdictions and departments. And then communicating that process and progress to providers is also key to this work. Finally, adopting land use codes to respond to these changing and dynamic opportunities. Next slide, please. So lenders, community lenders are key to this work. This work requires tools that are innovative products and can accommodate non-traditional operating sources, appraisals, and also development approaches. So there's a need for community lenders to coordinate with government funding programs and leverage those dollars for acquisition. Next slide, please. And of course, providers are absolutely essential to this work. We have to be aggressive and courageous about new opportunities in our advocacy, business models, and organizational methods. And this requires us to go after properties aggressively and remember there's no harm in putting something under contract. And it also requires us to work with jurisdictions from the very beginning, design land use codes and funding sources that work for us, and also consult our greatest asset, which is direct service staff. Next slide, please. And if you don't fall in any of those categories, we need you above all because we need you to work with providers to mobilize for solutions that work best for them. And oftentimes hyper local barriers inhibit these properties from being sited and being operational in a successful way. So your continued advocacy is essential for these solutions to work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Naomi and Gus and Secretary Castro Ramirez. We have about 15 minutes left, and we will have a little chance to get a couple of questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and Christina will watch those for us. But I want to start out with a couple of questions. And before I ask my first question, I want to say a little bit more of what I alluded to at the beginning, and that is within the federal rescue bill that is moving quickly through the House and hopefully on its way in the next couple of days to the president's desk, there is a $5 billion provision for authorization of dollars into the federal home program that is specifically for homelessness assistance and supportive services. And it's a little bit of an unusual vehicle for dollars that are directed towards addressing homelessness. But what it does is it brings to the table a powerful set of allies, and that is the housing finance agencies or statewide agencies that run the home program. And so I will assure you there are conversations going on already about how we really make this work in a way that gets the money into housing quickly. And so I do want to let you know that in your resources section, there is a short 2-page description of this section of the rescue bill. So if you're not familiar with it, there is a short description there that you can take a look at. So assuming that the bill passes and is signed by the president, I want to ask, starting with, the bill passed the House, 220 to 211. Bravo. So it's on its way. So get ready. One other thing I will say is that the bill includes a provision that HUD must make these funds available within 30 days of enactment. So this money is coming to your communities very, very quickly. And there is an end date that also stresses the urgency with which our policymakers want us to use these dollars, and that is that they must be used by 2025. So going first to Secretary Castro Ramirez, do you think decision makers in California will place a high priority on using these funds for more existing properties? And if yes, what can the participants from other states who are on this call do to start a conversation for making this a high priority in their state?
Yes, Mary. The answer to that is yes, it is a high priority, both for decision makers within the legislature and the governor's office, of course, but also for local jurisdictions. I mentioned that with the Homekey 1.0, we had over $1 billion in requests that came in from communities across the state. And so communities are waiting and lining up for additional dollars to become available. I will also mention that the governor introduced in January his 2021 budget proposal, and the budget proposal calls for leveraging or allocating $750 million in general funds from the state to be able to implement a Homekey round 2. And so, the dollars from the federal government will enable us to, to leverage, the federal resources and tie those to state dollars, assuming that the legislature approves and concurs with the budget recommendation. In terms of what we can do, I think that these opportunities to come together and to share our sort of stories and the approach that we have each taken in our respective states. I think is very important. Our team within the Housing and Community Development Department has been receiving a number of calls from other states, and we have been making ourselves available to provide just sort of one-on-one TA. We've also received calls from other countries, from Barcelona, Spain. Recently, there was a call from a team that read about Homekey, very interested in looking at how to replicate this program. So this is the time for us to share our stories and to make ourselves available to others.
Great. Thank you very much. And Naomi, I want to thank you for doing such a great job in your presentation of showing that there's a role for everybody. So are you hopeful that in Washington that this type of work will be a priority for the home funds? And what do you advise people on the call to do within their states?
Thank you. It's been difficult, I won't lie, to try to convince different lawmakers and stakeholders to try to make this a priority. But ultimately, I believe that great solutions win out when you have a bunch of great minds together. And so I think if we keep promoting the benefits and also assessing the outcomes in a very tangible way, and bringing everyone, of course, in the room, those with lived experience, direct service providers, and also developers who are seeing these ground level solutions, this solution will continue to rise as the top as one of the most effective ways to steward public resources to deliver and meet the needs of our communities during this time.
So just like Secretary Castro Ramirez, we need to share these success stories and help others to make that case in their communities. Gus, thanks for all those great pictures of buildings. It's really great to see them. And if you can come off mute for a minute and share whether you think Vermont will likely use some of these home dollars and what you recommend for others.
Well, since we administer the home program in Vermont, I can assure you we will use those dollars for these kinds of solutions. That's an easy question to answer. I was actually just on the phone with some friends that I'd met a few years ago when I was in Lawrence, Kansas the other day. Again, as Secretary had indicated, there is lots of interest in how do we do things quickly. And we finally have at the federal level a sense of urgency and a sense that we need to respond quickly to this crisis. And so I'm optimistic that other jurisdictions are going to pick this up and take this on, and we will see more solutions around the country. I think we still need to figure out nationally how to put more capital into affordable housing overall. I don't think $5 billion it's a great thing, but it's a down payment on what we need to be doing if we're going to meet the reality that housing is a human right and that housing is healthcare. So we need expansions across the tax credit program, the home block grant, the National Housing Trust Fund. We need more rental assistance for the people who we want to be able to rent these units. And we're going to need more and better, as Naomi said, coordination with our human services partner to make sure that folks are getting the supports they need so they can be successful in these homes. Great.
Thanks, Gus, for that call for more resources across the board. Having been the housing commissioner for 8 years, we always had 3 or 4 times as many great proposals as we had money to be able to fund them, especially when it came to permanent supportive housing. So with that, Christina, do we have any questions from our audience that you'd like to field for us?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, there are so many questions coming in. This is really just generating like a very robust, amazing conversation. Sadly, we don't have time for all of them. So I'm going to try to condense some and pick out some of the themes I'm seeing. Gus, I'll shoot this to you. This is a sort of implementation question. Who is best positioned to purchase the hotels? Is this government? Is this nonprofits? Is it private sector partners? Like, who should actually do the purchasing?
Well, as I said, in Vermont, we don't have community development staff for most of our municipalities, and we invented this nonprofit and invest in it annually, nonprofit delivery system. So that's our answer here to make sure that rural communities have the capacity to take this on. It's not a great role for government. I think it's hard for governmental agencies to do the negotiation and get the best deals possible. But I'd let others speak to what the role is for the private sector here.
Yeah, and I know California took a different approach. So
right. I was going to just sort of chime in that housing authorities in the state of California are fairly strong and very comprehensive. Not only, of course, operating public housing programs and Section 8. The Section 8 housing choice voucher, but it also have development capacity. And so in California, we saw a number of housing authorities apply for these Homekey awards from San Diego to Los Angeles to San Francisco. And so housing agencies, I think it's really important, right, to engage, your housing agencies, housing authorities. And most of our funds went through counties and cities who partnered up with community development corporations or affordable housing development groups.
I would just also add, as a funder, we provide feasibility assistance, technical assistance, and I think that those are important ingredients to people being able to be successful on the ground, whoever is taking the lead at the community level. And in this new block grant, new home allocation, I think 5% of it can be spent on operating assistance to nonprofits. So where there's a need to build capacity, there's an opportunity to use some of the funds to do that as well.
Thank you so much. There were a couple questions, and Naomi, I'm wondering if you could answer this. What if the motels that you're sort of looking at or targeting for acquisition are already being used for emergency shelter, and perhaps the owners are getting more money from the emergency shelter contract than they could ultimately get through an acquisition deal? So how do you balance those two priorities, and how do you have those conversations with motel owners who might be, sort of participating in a multitude of ways with our homeless system?
Absolutely. And I think this is, again, where the coordination between human services and housing departments comes together, because if we can coordinate where those emergency shelter grants are going with properties that potentially could be used for acquisition and long-term conversion to permanent housing, we better situate service providers to make that transition. And we also don't create exactly that situation you're talking about, where we basically bridge a private hotel owner's kind of like depressed period until they can rehabilitate their hotel. So we're actually leveraging shelter money for long-term opportunities to serve our vulnerable populations.
That's great. Thank you. Just a question for all three of you. Acquiring the property is one thing, having a place for people to live is one thing, but the services and the operations are the other legs of that stool, right? So how have your communities or states gotten creative about pairing other resources to make sure that these units can function as permanent supportive housing?
Yeah, I'll mention that critically important, Christina, in the design of our Homekey initiative, we did not completely lean into developing the traditional permanent supportive housing requirements. Again, we had a very short period of time, and service dollars were not necessarily available. But we made it very clear that we expected grantees to work on providing a service delivery plan and social service, essentially to have a social service component. I think one of the unique things about the way that Homekey was shaped in California was because of our efforts with Roomkey and our work with the Department of Social Services, who essentially led the Roomkey, Project Roomkey initiative. we were able to connect very quickly to also the county social service entities. So, I think it's still sort of work in progress. Some grantees know how to blend services and housing and deliver them on site or bring them to the site. Others, requires additional support and technical assistance, and hence this is why I think it's important as we continue to look down the line that it is important, right, that we pay equal attention to the service delivery plan as we do to the actual bricks and mortar, the actual housing.
Gus, anything to add?
Completely agree with Secretary Castro Ramirez that we did ask for partnership agreements that spoke to that. In one case, local hospital provided service dollars because they saw housing as healthcare. In other cases, we actually tripled the capacity of an organization that works with victims of domestic violence, and they brought their service capacity to it. So across the state, it was a different mix in every project we did, but there was always a service partner.
Thank you. And so maybe just in the quick minute or two that we have left, there was a question around what kind of rehab is actually happening? Are you installing kitchens in every unit? Are you creating shared kitchen spaces? What were like the most important rehab components when you're looking at the different motels and hotels? Naomi, I don't know if you want to maybe touch on that.
Yeah, and I know Gus, I'm going to kick it over to him as well, because I know he's done great work on this. But one thing I would say is that there's an opportunity to use what's generally ample community space, or what can be seen as community space, at the ground level. So like business rooms, lobbies, kitchen spaces. And in one proposal, we're turning those rooms into a community court, a place for a food bank, arts recovery rooms, and social service provider spaces to build capacity as well. So that's another unique opportunity. But Gus, go ahead.
So the easiest and fastest conversions were hotels that already were suites, where there already were kitchen facilities in the units, and that went the fastest. The property that I showed you from Southern Vermont needed $1 million of rehab, and we were fortunate that contractors were willing to put in 10-hour days and work Saturdays to meet the deadline. We have a cold climate. We're against the Canadian border. So in some cases, we needed to do a fair amount of energy retrofits. One property needed new roofing. It varied from property to property. Every one of them is different. But most of these would not have been good candidates for the tax credit, even the program, because they weren't going to do enough rehab to generate basis. And if we were looking for something to change about the tax credit program in response to this emergency, might be to allow us to at least use the 4% credit, even when there's not going to be a lot of rehab, and take the basis on the sale price. Might be something to do to add resources and be able to better leverage the credit.
Thank you so much. Mary, you want to wrap us up and take us home?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I really want to thank our panelists. What a great job you did of telling the story of this resource. And I hope that those of you who are watching, if we've whetted your appetite to learn more, please let the folks at the Alliance know that you'd like to know more, and we can certainly look at the possibility of bringing other opportunities for sharing the information. I want to thank the audience members for all your great questions, and hopefully there'll be a way to respond to some of those in the post-conference information as well. I want to remind the attendees to please complete the survey. Tell us what you thought about what you heard today. And with that, I think we are finished. And thank you very much.